Welcome to the Newsmakers Podcast. I'm Billy Hollowell, and this is a show where we go behind the headlines every day to bring you an interview with a pastor, entertainer, politician, or other notable news figure. And this is a show, again, it's daily, but it's based on our weekly TV show, which is also called Newsmakers. You can watch it on the CBN News channel and also on our YouTube page. And on this show, every day, we dive deep. It's a little more longer form with one of the people who you will often see on our Newsmakers show or across the CBN News platforms. On today's Newsmakers, Pastor Ed Newton of Community Bible Church in San Antonio, Texas, recently went viral after he embraced a homeless man, stopped his sermon in the middle of church, invited that man up. So many incredible things happened, not only in that moment inside that church, but also after the video went viral. We're here today to talk with Pastor Ed Newton about all of those details. With no further ado, here he is to break it all down. So you have been going viral over the past few days over an interaction that you had last month with a homeless man at your church during service. Before we get into all the details, what was your reaction to seeing this particular interaction go viral?
Well, I think first and foremost, Billy, I didn't even know it went viral until my phone started blowing up and people just started reaching out across the country going, "Hey, I saw this video," because we didn't post it. So it didn't come out of our church. We our marketing director, executive Tiffany Brown, when this went down, we made an actual decision. We sat in the room after that service and went, "We're not posting this. We're not going to post this. It'll be seen as if we're exploiting Anthony." And as much as Michael, who is in my humble opinion, the hero of the story, we're like, this is going to be told as were you in the room? And if you weren't in the room, you missed it. That's literally what we were going to do. And somebody held up their phone and recorded it and posted it. And that's what happened. So for the longest time, I didn't even know. I had no idea until all of a sudden people just started reaching out across the country. And I was like, why? What is happening right now?
Well, and this was early April, right? April 7th or so that
Yes.
this
Yeah.
happened.
That's
So,
what's amazing. I walked in a room yesterday, Billy, and this guy was like, "Hey, man, I know you're probably still reeling from this, like last weekend." I was like, "That's what's so crazy about social media." I'm like, "Dude, that's been almost a month ago." Like,
you've lived a whole other life since that moment unfolded, right? Yeah,
yes.
it's crazy to watch because you see the clip, and it's interesting you say that. I did go to your Facebook page. I was looking for the video, and I assumed that you guys did not post it intentionally, which
Hmm.
makes sense, to not want to look as though something's being exploited. But I think the way this actually looks is incredible in terms of Michael, who is the man who brought Anthony, who is
Yeah.
homeless, to church. Your sermon, how you reacted. I want to just ask you first, this is this moment for those who haven't seen it where you're on stage, you're giving your sermon, and somebody yells, Anthony, an expletive, from the audience. And I would imagine that's not something that happens every day, to pastors. What was going through your mind initially? And I had heard that it happened a number of times that morning, but when you
Hmm.
heard that,
Yeah. The part that is missed because the video that went viral didn't include the first part of what actually happened. So any pastor could hear this and go, "Yeah, I know exactly what this feels like." You walk out on stage after the last song and you typically begin with an introduction. "So glad you're here. You welcome the guest." But the moment I, like Billy, opened my mouth to go, to say something, there is profanity that shouted at me. And it was a compliment. I wear all black every day, but I wear Jordans. And so I'm very not interesting to look at as a person. But my shoes stood out to Anthony, but I didn't know Anthony. And so Anthony yells out, "Cool blank shoes." And so immediately it just checks me. And I'm like, "Hey, what's your name?" And he goes, "Anthony." And I was like, "Well, cool, man. Glad you're here. Typically don't get greeted like that. Glad you're in the room." And just moved on. And then got into the bulk of the message because we were actually preaching through our core values. And the core value of that weekend was celebrate life change. We
Mm.
just got out of baptism, um, just baptized like over 200 people. and we celebrate, like we actually have like a pep rally when people get baptized. And we're talking about lost found party, which is the story of the prodigal, the lost coin, lost sheep. And I'm talking about the Pharisees that are real critical of Jesus. And that's the part where you pick up on the video where Anthony yells out again and he goes, as I'm talking about the Pharisees, he goes, "That's blank blank." And and
And
here's the
again,
deal.
you're in a position I would imagine is a little awkward in the moment because you've got kids in the room, probably families in the room,
Yes.
people who are not used to this, and you have to make a decision at that moment of what you're going to do. I don't want to speak for you, but as I'm watching it, I'm thinking this.
No, Billy, you're right on. And truth be told, his statement about the Pharisees was pretty accurate in what he said. That they were, whatever. And I think for me, I wanted to go, no, you're exactly right. Just how you said it is was a little off, but I don't know. I'm a student pastor. I've been a student pastor for a long time, and I've just been a senior pastor for 8 years. And for anybody that's watching that's a student pastor, there's nothing that you've not seen. And for me, all I knew to do in that moment was to go, hey, listen, if we're one on one, I'm not correcting you. But because we got little ears in the room, I had to somewhat kind of just say, hey, you're welcome here, you're loved here. And then when he yelled out after that, this guy saved my life, then I'm trying to figure out, and this is the part, Billy, that I did not know till a week later, because I don't go back and watch services. Um, Somebody walked up to me, Billy, and goes, how did you know he was homeless? Because he didn't look homeless. He was shaved, had a mustache. I, I said, what do you mean? They were like, Ed, you went from, he said that, and then you looked right at him and said, are you homeless? And I was like, no, I didn't do that. They're like, no, Ed, you were really direct with that guy.
Wow.
And I didn't know I did it. I really honestly did not know that I changed the gear without a clutch and just went from here to here. And when I said, are you homeless? That's when he looked at Michael and went, this dude saved my life.
I
So
mean, and
crazy.
at that moment, it is crazy. I mean, I got chills as you were saying that, because you're standing there and you're in front of all these people in your church and you have this moment and it was this gentle rebuke. The way you did it was so kind and he responded really well to it.
Hmm.
But there's a moment then where you can see your gears are turning and you're thinking, and I imagine you're maybe even praying in those moments. You then invite him, Anthony, and Michael,
Hmm.
the man who he said saved his life, up to the stage with you. You sit down on the stage, they come up. What was it that motivated that? Because that's also a big risk in that moment because
Hmm.
you don't know how that conversation's going to go.
Yeah. Well, Michael, I invited Michael up, who is a 24-year-old African American financial analyst, by the way, hero of the story. That's kind of, I find out in that moment, because I didn't know Michael prior, that's come up through our college ministry. And I invited Michael up. I felt in my heart, which, first of all, that's not the first time I've invited people. Like, I just felt that what they had to say to give testimony, I do a lot of that. Like, hey, brother, why don't you come say a word, tell us what's going on? But it typically doesn't become the sermon, it becomes like a 60-second, 90-second, 2-minute testimony. But I knew at that moment there was something going on with, I wanted Michael to be the, I knew at that moment Michael was preaching the sermon. But I didn't know that Michael came to the 8 o'clock service and the 10 o'clock, because we have five services, one on Saturday at 5, four on Sunday, 8, 10, 12, 2. He came to the 8, 10, heard the message, and left the 10 o'clock service and bought somewhat of a breakfast meal to give to a homeless person. And when he went to go give it to her, she wasn't there, and then he saw Anthony, and he walks up to Anthony, and Anthony goes, where are you coming from? And Michael goes, I just came from church. And then that's where Anthony invites himself to go to church with Michael.
Well, can I just say too that Michael has been to, I didn't realize it was two services. He's been to two services now. He's on his way home. He's going to do the right thing, live out the
Yeah.
message he heard from you. I would imagine Michael probably wanted to go home at that point. He had been to church already. And, so here's this guy asking him or saying, I want to go to church. I'm inviting myself to church. And he had a choice to make in that moment. And he chose to take Anthony back to church for a third time. I mean, that to me is a pretty amazing piece of the story, a simple piece, but an incredible one.
That is the thing that captivated the because if you look back at the video when I'm sitting down on the stage, I love the fact that one person in the congregation can be heard going, Ed, that's the sermon. That's the sermon. Because we were talking about leave the 99, go after the one. And when one of the congregationalists yells it, you'll hear me as I'm sitting down going, that's right. That's so Michael was the sermon. He lived it out. He's the hero, and he's so meek. And meekness is not weakness; it's power under control. Michael's one of the most humble guys. We're about to go do a podcast out in California. Like this has been crazy. Michael's the hero of the story. He's every pastor's dream that hears the sermon and tries to live it out.
Yeah, and so when Anthony comes up, you hear this story about how, and feel free to fill in any blanks, but he was going to throw himself in front of a vehicle that
Hmm.
morning. He was going to kill
Hmm.
himself,
Right.
and it gives me chills to think that had Michael not come and interacted, looking for that woman, finding him, what could have happened that day, and he ends up at church. When you heard that detail that he was going to take his own life that day, what went through your heart?
It wrecked me. If you watch the video, like it wrecked me because he actually gave a timestamp. He said I was just a few minutes away from stepping out in front of a bus. And the part that nobody really knows unless you go to CBC, about 3-4 years ago, I dressed up as a homeless man. Like honestly, got it. This is gonna sound you're gonna think I'm making this up, Billy. I got a professional costume artist to dress me up. My name was Tim. Facial, smoked a cigarette, like long wig, and I wanted to see how our church responded to people that didn't look like us. Well, that moment honestly shaped me for the rest of my life. For the rest of my life, because I know what it felt like to not be talked to. I walked into our church on a couple spaces and people just didn't know what to do. I mean, I was really disheveled because of the professional costume artist. For a solid weekend, I felt that tension. And
Wow.
so even to this day, and you got to hear my heart, Billy. This is not like trying to self promote. I just now know I know what it feels like for people not to look you in the eyes because I felt it for
Yeah.
this,
Wow.
and so ooh, man, I can't like it wouldn't even. I was dressed up, and people wouldn't even look at me, and the crazy part was I knew them, but they didn't know me. So it just so that shaped me. Even to this day, I'll come up to and by the way, anybody watching this, I'm not saying that you should engage anybody at a stoplight. That's not what I'm saying. But I'll roll down a window and I will look at people and go, hey, listen, tell me your name. They'll tell me their name. I go, I'm going to look you in the eye and tell you that you matter. I don't have anything to give you right now. If I did, I give it to you. But I just want you to hear me say, I love you and I care. So when he said when Anthony said all of that stuff to me, I was feeling that from a couple years ago of just so that's why you hear me say, when was the last time you've been hugged? And he goes, a long time. And
Wow.
so that's when I'm hugging him. I'm overwhelmed with emotion. Anthony, who is one of the most compassionate dudes you'll ever be around, starts wiping my tears as I'm trying to communicate in that moment. So
And
yeah,
he even apologized at one point for how he was dressed, like I'm not
yes,
dressed. Yeah, he wasn't dressed, but he had a t-shirt on and, but I thought that was so interesting and just you hugging him, how powerful that was because in that moment, there are a lot of people, they see a homeless person, they want to walk the other way. They don't know what to do. Like you were saying, I just have to ask you one more thing about the experiment you did, you know, how did the church react and how did
mhm,
you react after? What did it teach you about the
yeah.
church?
Well, there was a moment that our church responded so well. Um, Obviously, in moments where I had encounters, you don't encounter the whole church, you just encounter a certain group of people. But
Sure.
at the last service, his name's Johnny. And I'm gonna get emotional thinking about this because Johnny was a 40-year-old heroin addict. Not 40, his addiction was 40 years. So
Wow.
Johnny and his sister pick me up at the entrance of the church, put me in their car, take me into the service. And it's our last service of the day. And Johnny's language was rough. The F word never sounded more godly to me coming out of Johnny's mouth, because he was an addict who ended up in the hospital, gets cleaned up, gets saved at our church, and is during the baptism service, doesn't know he's talking to the pastor. And Johnny goes, dude, when this guy gets up here to preach, you're going to love this guy. He connects. So Johnny's talking about me, but he doesn't even know he's talking about me. And he says,
Wow.
when he's done preaching, you're going to come home with us. We're going to get you some Whataburger, which is a big Texas thing. We're going to get you some Whataburger. You're going to live with me and my sister, and we're going to find you a job.
Wow.
That encounter, that story, and this is the thing, what I'm saying to you, Billy, that story never got told, virally. But what it did is impacted our church internally, that we never, this is the phrase that came out of that, you never look down on somebody unless you're helping them up.
I
And
love
that
that.
became the mantra of our church, is
Wow.
everybody's at a different step in the journey in their spiritual progress. And if you've been walking with Jesus like I have for over 30 years, you can't hold somebody accountable to your standard of spiritual maturity that you've had for a 30-year progression for somebody that may just encounter Jesus for the first time in 3 minutes.
Yeah. No, and it's so crazy. Everybody's on such a different plane. Some people come
Yes.
right into it and they're on fire immediately. Other people, it's a long process of
Yes.
getting there, And I think we have sort of a cookie cutter approach of how we assume like you're going to accept Jesus and everything goes away. It's like that does happen for people, but for a lot of people, it's a real journey of struggle. And so that as a pastor. you know so as far as Anthony goes, the way that the viral video and the stories have ended is you in the church, we're going to help him. People were obviously coming up, putting money up there, but you had said we're going to help him get on his feet.
Mhm.
We're not going to just throw money at him. Where are things now with Anthony?
Yeah, it's super incredible. Well, let me just make this one. I'll make one comment. Michael, in the video, I said, Michael, what motivated you to bring him here? And he said this. He goes, I knew he'd be accepted.
Wow.
And the most humbling thing that could be said about our church was the fact that a 24-year-old knew he could bring somebody in our church and he'd be loved on. And that's what happened. The church responded. They started bring. If you watch the video, there were two moments. There was a woman that walked up to me that said she wanted to share her testimony. Another woman and a mom came up. Another woman and a baby came up and said, "Hey, I need help." She saw the money and she was like, I'm struggling. I need help." So we ended up trying to help those two people. But the $5,000, Billy, was thrown on the altar in that moment.
$5,000. I did not realize
$5,000.
that. Wow. Wow.
$5,000 was thrown in the altar. We counted that obviously at the end of the service. Um, and as that unfolded into the service, because the video doesn't show this, I was like, hey, Michael preached the sermon. This is a service that's impacted us greatly. I shared a brief gospel message: death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, power of the cross. 35 people walked forward to get saved.
Wow.
35. Like no music, no like heads bowed, eyes closed. You want Jesus, walk forward. 35. 35. It's
Wow.
crazy. So I end the service like that. Um, we bring Michael and Anthony. And one of the things that's been interesting is people were like, where's security? They were there. Security was just creating a halo. What was making me feel uncomfortable, and this is the hard part, and you'll hear this if anybody goes to my Instagram, you'll see the following week I had to address this in our church. I was on the verge of having a panic attack while people were walking up on me because of some other things that have happened in our church. Where a couple months ago, a guy threw a cigarette at me at a 2 o'clock service. There's just been a lot of, but just for anybody watching,
Yeah.
we're safe. We got great security, but we prayed several years ago, God, would you send people to this church that nobody gets, nobody understands, nobody wants? And by your power, by your spirit, use us to love and to make them who you want them to be. Well, that's a raw prayer, and God's doing that. And but when that went down, man, I tried to get Anthony and Michael away from everybody that probably wanted to help. We bring him backstage. Assistant police chief of San Antonio, who loves Jesus, and so does the police chief. Assistant police chief was in the room. Typically comes to the 10 o'clock service, just
Wow.
so shows up at I'm gonna air quote that at the 12 o'clock. She knows exactly how to triage this. So she meets us in the back room. My office is right there in the vicinity of the worship center. We go back in my office. She walks through the protocol, and because Anthony had said out loud he was going to kill himself, immediately that's a moment, and Anthony was willing to do this. We didn't have to force him to do this, was to get a 72-hour hold just for his safety. So we got him to the local hospital. They did some diagnostics. The really cool part about this story that you'll hear in the video, this is not just like privy information. I say this the following week. He's sitting in my office, and it's Michael and Anthony that now have just bonded together. Um, Anthony goes, Pastor Ed, I need some smokes. And he was so nervous, so he's just like, he goes, I need some cigarettes. Well, one of my associates, I said, hey, Tony, I think we got some cigarettes in my cabinet, which caused the police chief to go, what pastor has cigarettes in his cabinet? And it came from a couple of weeks prior, or months prior. We had a service where we're like, hey, whatever addiction you're struggling with, throw it on the altar. And I'm not trying to be crass, Billy, but 2 condoms, 5 vape pens, and 1 pack of cigarettes and a razor blade was thrown on the
Wow.
altar. And it was in a basket in my cabinet as a reminder that God is breaking chains. Well, I said, Tony, I think we got some cigarettes. So Tony gives those cigarettes to Anthony. He tries to light up in my office. I'm like, Anthony, you can't light up in my office right now. Um, and the assistant police chief kind of walks through, hey, this is what we're going to do. They get him to the hospital. He's there for a couple of days. And this is the crazy part of the story. He gets out. We're ready to take him to rehab. He opts out. He goes, I'm not doing it.
Wow.
He goes, I'm not doing it. So then he goes on the street for 2, 3 weeks. Crazy. This video that you're talking about that I don't know is viral gets around. I tell the church the weekend after, because the 12 o'clock was like, Ed, tell us what's going on. I go, hey, he didn't go to rehab. We still got that $5,000. The moment he turns in this direction, we're going to help him. We're helping him get some supplies because we're Frank Kirby's one of our counselors who is the hero behind the scenes that kept meeting with Anthony at Whataburger, random places at Walmart, 11 o'clock at night, a staff member who was getting in contact, meeting his needs. And this is just this, Billy, this is breaking news. And I just posted this on my Instagram Friday. I'm in my office in security. It's 3 weeks later, and our church is bumping into Anthony, and they're like, Anthony, we love you. They're praying, we're praying for you. Anthony's waving, but he's not trying to get help from nobody. He walks back in our church on Friday. So
Wow.
crazy. Security's like, Ed, Anthony's in the lobby right now. So I go out there with my son, who's 16. And Frank has gotten him a bus ticket. Anthony wakes up that Friday morning after a binger, just wakes up. I mean, like passed out, wakes up, and he goes, I'm done. I can't
Wow.
do this no more. He gets a ride or walks to our church, calls for Frank Kirby, who's been meeting him for about 3 weeks randomly at Whataburger and other places. And Frank gets him a bus ticket, 3 hours to Bryan, Texas, to a rehab facility. And right now, as we speak, I got goosebumps saying this. My man Anthony's in rehab.
Wow. I mean, this is incredible. At every level of this, at every layer of this, it involves one of you, everything from your sermon that you were called to give, right, down the line, making a decision to step out and do what God has called you to. For Michael, and now for Anthony, for the church congregation coming forward with the money. I mean, every step of this, just trusting God. And I want to emphasize what I was saying before about how it takes people time
Mhm.
sometimes, right? The fact that you guys didn't give up on him, that you were there for him, still meeting with him, still guiding him, getting him supplies, trying to help him and that because of that, very likely he showed back up at the church and was willing to make the change weeks later, right? That's just incredible to me.
Yeah, it's incredible. And when I met him in the lobby, and if anybody watches this and goes to at Pastor Ed Newton, and that's not a shameless plug for an Instagram, you'll just see the post of that encounter where Anthony goes, "I'm going to rehab," and he's just such a funny dude. And he goes, and this was Anthony's words: "My story to be continued." That's what he says. And then he goes, and I told him, I said, "Dude, when you get out of this, we're gonna party." Like Holy Spirit party. So right now, I'll tell you what's going on. We're sending him care packages with notes. Me and Frank Kirby are his emergency contact number at the rehab place,
That
and
is
uh,
amazing.
and he is like right now sending me and Frank Kirby. I need cigarettes. I need cigarettes.
He's trying. I mean,
It's
go ahead.
amazing.
Go ahead.
No, I was
It
just
is
gonna say,
amazing.
when somebody hears this and they're like, "Well, he shouldn't be on cigarettes." Can I just say this? That's the least of my worries right now. This dude has been on some hardcore drugs. We got to minimize just, and I'm like, the Holy Spirit will get to the cigarettes, but he's first got to work through a lot of other things first. And that's the tension because our counselor is like, "Ed, do we give him cigarettes?" And I'm like, "Dude, once more, the gospel's about heart transformation that leads to behavior modification." And I think so many times the church, and we get it wrong too, we try to clean people up on the outside before the inside. So,
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, I think the fact that he's there doing this, right? And that's a part of the story a lot of people probably haven't heard. They've seen the viral video, they've read the
yeah.
write-ups, but they haven't. I had not heard that part, obviously, and I had not seen that. So that is amazing. I've taken a lot of your time. Can we talk for just a couple more minutes? Because I wanted to talk about your backstory, which I also did not know your incredible backstory. I'd love to hear how you came to faith, but before we get there, I mean, you were the only child, correct me if I'm wrong, of
Mhm.
two deaf parents.
Yeah.
And that is such a unique experience. Talk a little bit about what that was like growing up.
Yeah. You know what's so crazy? I just thought it was normal.
It
So,
was your normal. I mean,
it
that
was
is,
my
yeah.
normal. It was my normal. Billy, I know we don't have a whole lot of time, but my mom died 4 years ago, and my dad died 2 years ago. Only child. They were told they can never have kids, and I just recently, within the past 4 years, got my grandmother, who passed away almost 20 years ago, her journal, and my grandmother takes my mom, newly married to my dad. This is before me coming into the world, to a tent revival service in Charlotte, North Carolina. And my mom goes to a healing service because she was raised in a Christian home. My mom was a Christian when she married my dad, and my dad wasn't a Christian at that time when they got married. Couldn't have children because my mom had cerebral palsy. So my mom goes to a healing service in Charlotte, North Carolina to get healed of cerebral palsy and her deafness. And the evangelist prophesies over my mom. Billy, this is crazy. My mom's deaf. She wants to be healed of her deafness and cerebral palsy, and the evangelist speaks over my mom, which my mom can't understand. My grandmother has to translate it, and so my mom's looking at my grandmother. I read this in the journal. What did he say? That's the sign for what did he say? And my grandmother tells my mom, "You're pregnant,"
Wow.
and that's me.
Wow.
So I don't know that. I'm 10 years old at a McDonald's in Orlando, Florida, where I grew up. Sweet African American senior adult who I believe was an angel. She goes, "You interpret for your parents everywhere you go?" Because she just saw me do this at McDonald's. I was the voice for my mom and dad everywhere we went. I ordered for them. I answered the phone for them. That was just, I was the voice, I was the ears, and they were the parents. And
Wow.
she told me this when I was 10. I'll never forget it. I'll be almost 49 this year. And she said, "One day God's going to greatly use you." I was 10. I didn't come to know Jesus till I was in high school. And when I look at my story, my dad, fast forward, I look at my dad one day and I go, "Do you wish you could be healed of your deafness?" And my dad goes, no. I said, Dad, I'm confused. You've been discriminated against. You've not had equal opportunity, being handicapped. We lived in a season of government subsidized housing because we couldn't afford stuff. And my dad goes, no. I go, Dad, what do you mean? And he looked at me, and Billy, I'll never forget this. My dad goes, look at you. I go, Dad, what do you mean? Man, I get emotional thinking about it. He goes, because of our deafness, God raised you to be a voice for us, and then God called you to be a voice for him. And you see people
Wow.
that other people don't see, and you hear people that other people don't hear. Because I grew up in an environment in a lot of spaces where forgive me for walking into another room, but I grew up in different environments where I didn't get a chance to, I, I, I just saw different people from the fact that both my parents were handicapped. And so I'm growing up with blind people. I'm growing up with deaf people. That was my world. So for me personally, I've always been drawn and gravitated to the underdog, the overlooked, and my journey has been that. And yeah,
That's
so
incredible. And here we are talking about this story, though. I mean, the connection points between everything we're talking about with Anthony and everything you just talked about are incredible. And I love what your dad had said to you about, being a voice, right? You were a voice for your parents, and then getting to be a voice for God and doing what you're doing now. I don't want to take any more of your time. This has
no, we're
been
good.
incredible. I want to have you back again, though,
I'd
because
love
there's a
it.
lot more to dig into on your story. And I just appreciate, we'll have to do an update on Anthony as well and see where things go as he goes through rehab.
Hey, if
Appreciate
he
your
comes
time
out and
today.
we throw a party, Billy, I'm going to invite you to it.
I will be there. I will absolutely be there.
We have a park at the church. I'm right now. I'm already arranging like a DJ. I mean, I'm telling you, if he comes out of rehab cleaned up, our city is going to lose its mind. We're going to throw the
I,
biggest party.
I, I will be there. I love it. I appreciate you, just your heart and everything you did that day, but also sharing it because this is what people need to be hearing. This is what we need to be doing as Christians. We get so distracted, remembering that we have a calling, and it's very simple. All of you took very simple steps that had a huge impact, right? And a huge, potentially a huge kingdom impact, obviously a definitive one. You had over 30 people come up because of
Mhm.
what went on that day. So we
Absolutely.
pray for the same for Anthony too.
No, thank you, man. I think we all live by this principle. I know you do as well, Billy. You do for one what you hope you could do for all, and that's Jesus. Leave the 99, go after the one.
That's all for today's Newsmakers podcast. Be sure to tune in for the next episode of the show, and also head over to the CBN News YouTube channel and the CBN News channel to watch Newsmakers every week. We'll see you soon.